I'm going to tell you about the day a cheap padlock and one woman's ego almost turned our neighborhood into a disaster reel. And yeah, I know that sounds dramatic. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't been standing there with smoke in my lungs, watching firefighters argue with a lady in a bathrobe like she was the final boss of suburbia. So let me rewind. I live in a place I'll call Cedar Bluff, not the real name. A ridge community up in the foothills where the air smells like pine and the summers get so dry your lips crack just walking to the mailbox. People move here for quiet, views, and a sense that life is simpler when you're far from the city. That part is true. What they don't tell you is that quiet places come with loud dangers. Wildfires are always a maybe out here until they aren't. My name's Evan. I'm not anyone special. Just a guy who wanted space after a messy divorce, a dog who thinks he's a wolf, and a property line that backs up to county land. The realtor called it ideal for privacy. What it really means is I'm one of the last houses before the trees thicken into brushland, and if fire ever hits the ridge, we're front row. When I bought my place, it came with a service easement along the left edge of my lot. Not pretty, not scenic, just a dirt track with a big wooden gate at the entrance. That gate matters because about 15 feet past it, buried under gravel and weeds, is a steel hatch that covers the emergency valve for the backup water main. The county installed that line after a mudslide years ago wiped out the primary pipes. And in wildfire season, if hydrants up the ridge start to sputter, fire crews go straight to that valve to pull pressure and keep homes from going up. It's in the county emergency plan. It's in the fire department GPS routing. It's basically a lifeline disguised as a rusty metal box. Most of the year, nobody thinks about it. Ideally, nobody ever has to. But the access needs to stay clear. That's why the gate exists, to keep random hikers out, but also to give emergency responders a fast way in. Enter my neighbor. Her real name isn't important, so let's call her Denise Crowell. Denise was the self-appointed queen of Cedar Bluff's HOA. Even before the fire, everybody knew her. She was that person who acted like the bylaws were holy text. She didn't just notice violations. She hunted them. With a clipboard. With photos. With a smile that looked kind until you realized it never reached her eyes. I'd had a few minor run-ins with Denise before. She told me my trash can sat too close to the curb. She complained that my sunflower patch was too wild. One time she actually left a note saying my porch light was not consistent with the neighborhood's visual harmony. I learned quick that arguing with her was like arguing with a parking ticket. So I kept my head down. I wasn't trying to win a war. I was trying to live. That's why what happened next still blows my mind. It was a Monday. Nothing special. I was in the backyard fixing a warped post on my chicken coop, coffee still warm, my dog Max trotting the fence line like he was on duty. I looked up and saw Denise walking down the gravel access road toward my property with that rigid little march like she was headed to serve a summons. At first I figured she was on her way to bother someone else. But her path didn't drift. It locked straight onto my easement gate. She paused at the gate, glanced around like a spy, then pulled something shiny from her purse. I didn't even have time to say, "Hey, what are you doing?" before I heard it click. She snapped a brand new silver padlock onto the chain that held the gate shut, gave herself a satisfied nod, and turned like she'd just conquered foreign territory. I jogged over. "Denise, did you just lock my gate?" She turned slowly, sunglasses on, face calm, voice clipped. "Yes, Evan. Per Guideline 9C, any access structure visible from community trails must remain secured with HOA-approved locking hardware during daylight hours. Your gate is unapproved and aesthetically inconsistent." I just stared at her. "It's a service gate. It's for emergency access. And it's on my property." She gave that little patient smile people use when they're about to explain math to a toddler. "That's your interpretation. It's visible from the ridge trail. It's an eyesore. I filed multiple complaints. The board has been slow, so I acted." Then she did the most ridiculous part. She unfolded a flimsy lawn chair on her side of the property line, planted it facing my gate, popped open a kombucha, and sat down like a sentry guarding the padlock. Like she was daring anybody to touch it. I stood there thinking, this can't be real. Part of me wanted to walk to my shed, grab bolt cutters, and solve the issue in 10 seconds. But if you've ever dealt with someone like Denise, you know that solving something means signing up for 6 months of retaliation. She'd file complaints, threaten fines, make my life a paper-cut nightmare. So I backed off. I told myself she'd get bored. She'd go inside. She'd move on to a different victim. She didn't. She sat there for hours. 4, maybe 5. Every time I checked, she was still parked like a bored hall monitor, sipping her drink, watching the gate. And while she was out there playing HOA sheriff, the weather turned ugly. You can feel it out here when fire risk spikes. The heat goes dense. The air gets twitchy. The wind starts breathing wrong. I checked my phone. The county fire map had already flagged a brush fire east of us. Not huge yet, but growing. The wind was pushing hard toward the ridge. I looked out at Denise, still sitting there smug in her chair, and for the first time my stomach sank. Because that gate wasn't some symbolic boundary. It was the lock on the only fast route to our emergency water. Around sunset, the smoke showed up. Thin at first, then thickening like a bruise across the horizon. Max started pacing, whining low. Sirens kicked off in the distance, not the lazy kind, the urgent layered kind. Multiple engines. I ran down the gravel drive toward the gate, already rehearsing how I'd explain what happened. But when I rounded the bend, I stopped cold. 2 fire engines were parked near the trailhead, lights strobing red through the haze. Firefighters were moving fast, grabbing hoses, radios barking. And right in the middle of it, like the universe was pranking us, Denise was still there. She'd changed outfits. I swear. Earlier, she looked like a suburban ranger. Now she was in a plush pink bathrobe, hair up, sipping from a wine glass like she'd wandered into a backyard party instead of a wildfire. A young firefighter ran up to her. "Ma'am, we need access through this gate. This is the emergency valve route." Denise didn't jump, didn't panic. She took a slow sip and said, "I'm sorry, officer. This is private access under HOA authority. You can't enter without board authorization." I stepped forward. "Denise, what are you doing? Look at the ridge. The fire's coming this way. They need that valve." She barely turned her head toward me. "Evan, stay out of official HOA enforcement matters. This doesn't concern you." Another firefighter, older, voice hard, moved closer. "Ma'am, that valve is registered emergency infrastructure. You're obstructing an active emergency response. Unlock the gate now." Denise lifted her chin. "If you have legal authorization, present it." Embers were starting to float down around us, tiny orange streaks riding wind like sparks from a grinder. The glow behind the ridge wasn't sunset anymore. It was flame. The firefighters exchanged a look. I saw their frustration, but I also saw the constraint. The gate was on private property, and while they could force it if they had to, doing it without absolute clearance in a situation like this can create a legal nightmare afterward. Especially when a person like Denise is filming on her phone like she's documenting a crime. We didn't have time for her nonsense. We didn't have time for bureaucracy. The fire sure didn't care about HOA rules. I felt something in me snap. Not anger, exactly. More like a cold, steady clarity. Those rules, those fines, those petty threats I'd been avoiding suddenly looked tiny next to the wall of orange rolling toward our homes. So I turned and sprinted back up to my house. I grabbed a heavy tow strap from my shed, threw it in my pickup, and drove back down like my tires were on fire too. I lined up the truck, hopped out, looped the strap through the padlock and chain, then hooked it to my hitch. The firefighters backed up, eyes on me. Denise stood up halfway from her chair, shocked for the first time all day. "You can't do that," she shrieked. "That's HOA-installed security hardware. You're destroying community property." I didn't answer. I got in, put it in drive, and stomped the gas. The strap went tight. The truck growled. Gravel sprayed. For a second, nothing happened. Then the lock ripped loose with a screech, taking the rusty hasp right off the post. The gate flew open hard, slamming against the retaining fence. Instantly, the firefighters surged through. No hesitation. Hatch open. Valve spinning. Hoses uncoiling. The engine pump kicked on, and a roar of water hit the lines. You could feel the entire ridge exhale. They held the fire line near the lower neighborhood. But by the time pressure reached the upper foothill pocket, one cabin was already gone, the Caldwell family's place. A full loss. Black skeleton in the trees. Later that night, after the engines moved on, I stood in the wet dirt staring at the broken padlock in my driveway, and I felt sick. Because that delay mattered. Those minutes arguing with Denise in her bathrobe mattered. A home burned while she clung to her fake authority. The next morning the neighborhood felt like waking up after a fight you barely survived. Smoke still clung to the trees. People were outside sweeping ash, checking fences, hugging each other longer than usual. I expected quiet thanks. Instead, when I walked into town for coffee, the diner went dead quiet. Every head turned. A woman at the counter asked, "You're Evan, right? The guy with the gate?" I nodded. She shook her head, eyes wet. My brother's house almost went up because of that woman. And then the stories poured out. Denise fining people for garden hose noncompliance, harassing someone for a basketball hoop, threatening liens over patio furniture. Everybody had a Denise story. Most folks just tolerated her because nobody wanted a war with paperwork. But the fire changed something. Fear turned to rage when people realized her power trip almost cost lives. That evening, the town council called an emergency meeting. The hall was packed. Guess who was front row, wearing a crisp white suit, clipboard in her lap, like she was about to lecture everybody about civic pride? Denise. The mayor opened. "We are addressing obstruction of emergency access at Gate R9 during yesterday's wildfire response." He looked at me. "Mr. Hale, you were on site. Explain what happened." I rolled out the easement map. "That gate leads to the backup water main valve. It's a designated emergency access corridor. Blocking it delayed water pressure uphill." Denise shot her hand up and spoke without waiting. "The HOA charter governs visible structures along community trail zones. The gate was unapproved and unsecured. I acted in good faith to maintain safety and appearance." The fire chief didn't even try to hide his disgust. "Safety? You delayed crews. We rerouted tankers 14 miles. The Caldwells lost their home." Denise tried to pivot. "No one ever informed me about any special designation." I flipped open my folder. "The county did. In writing. In 2019. Here's the email trail and the signed acknowledgement from the HOA president at the time." Copies went down the council table. I watched Denise's face drain color. "And there's more," I said. "This valve was upgraded in 2022 using federal hazard mitigation funds. That makes it critical infrastructure. Interfering with access during a declared emergency isn't just an HOA issue. It can be a state or federal offense." That room went silent like oxygen got sucked out. The mayor finally said, "This will be forwarded to county emergency management and the state attorney's office. The HOA's responsibility will be reviewed." People clapped. Real clapped. Denise gathered her papers and walked out stiff as a statue. Again, if life was a movie, that would have been the ending. But she wasn't done. The next morning, I opened my mailbox and found 4 thick HOA envelopes. Fines. A cease and desist. A summons to some emergency conduct review panel. They were trying to punish me for breaking the lock. I laughed out loud, because it was either laugh or put my fist through the wall. I called my lawyer friend Ryan. We spread everything out across his desk. He scanned the HOA letters and shook his head. "They're citing bylaws from the 1980s, he said. "They're reaching. And here's the easement clause. Emergency access shall remain unobstructed and not regulated by private associations." That's airtight. Then he pulled up the county GIS map and showed me the infrastructure code tied to my easement. This isn't just a neighborhood dispute. It's protected. Blocking it during an active emergency carries real penalties. While we were talking, he got an anonymous email with HOA internal message screenshots. And there it was, Denise texting board members the morning she installed the lock. "We lock it now. He won't prove emergency status in time. Fines will pressure him to comply." She knew. It wasn't confusion. It was chess. We filed formal complaints with the county, regional infrastructure office, and state fire marshal. With evidence. 2 days later, a state investigator called me. "Mr. Hale, we're opening a formal investigation into obstruction of emergency access. Based on documentation, this may extend to individual and HOA liability." News vans showed up not long after. People made memes. The HOA panicked. They tried to backpedal with a weak apology. Homeowners called an emergency vote. Denise was removed from the board in a landslide. When she walked out of the clubhouse after the vote, clipboard limp at her side, she didn't look angry anymore. She looked stunned, like she never imagined the neighborhood would stop being scared of her. We replaced the gate with a new reinforced one and a smart lock tied directly to fire dispatch. The county helped fund it. The HOA reimbursed me for my truck repairs and basically begged everyone to forgive them. The ridge feels different now. Lighter. Like we all exhaled at once. But I keep thinking about those minutes. How close we were. How a single petty person almost turned a fire into a tragedy. And I wonder how many places are living one ego away from disaster. How many communities let small tyrants run the show because folks don't want conflict until conflict shows up with flames. I was that guy too for a while. I kept my head down, told myself the battles weren't worth it, until it wasn't a battle about paint colors anymore, until it was about whether my neighbors lost everything. So here's my question for you. Was I right to rip that lock off without waiting for legal clearance? Should firefighters have forced the gates sooner, lawsuits or not? And how much power is too much power for an HOA, or any neighbor who thinks rules matter more than people? Drop your take below. Tell me what you would have done, and if you've ever seen someone's ego put a whole community at risk, share that story too. Because real justice doesn't always come from big dramatic heroes. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people deciding they're done being bullied. Hit like, subscribe, and let's talk about where the line is between following rules and doing the right thing. Because that line matters, and in Cedar Bluff, we learned it the hard way.